Yes, Judge.
Okay.
While he comes in, may we approach?
Yes. in the jury box and see if you want.
So, Doctor, I think we left off on discussing your differential diagnosis, and
Yes.
we were talking about bipolar 1.
Yes.
So how did you rule out bipolar 2?
As we already discussed, again, a stimulant can precipitate a hypomanic episode as well. I didn't see anything that would make me believe that he had a hypomanic episode outside of substance use. And that's another thing you got to look at as well, is that you got to look at whether or not somebody is using substances that can also mimic that disorder. So again, I had some questions, but because of the biological effect of bipolar disorder, I ruled bipolar disorder out of my differential because of the non-reaction to stimulants, illegal or otherwise.
Okay. And how did you rule out schizophrenia?
When I went to look at psychotic disorders, that was more important to talk with John about. I'd already got information from the jail records and the hospital records, and I had some idea what was going on there, but I always like to ask the person that I'm talking with about their psychotic symptoms. Usually people with schizophrenia, they'll be able to tell you their psychotic symptoms even if they're not psychotic. So they'll be able to tell you how they used to be when they weren't on treatment or something like that, and they can give you a lot of good detail on that. It doesn't go away, their knowledge of the symptoms, even though they're medicated and they no longer have the symptoms. But when I started talking with John about the symptoms, I realized that there was not any depth to the symptoms. So he could report some basic symptom, like he was hearing voices that he'd burn in hell for what he did, but there was nothing further. Usually when somebody is psychotic, it'll be more detail about that. So you can ask more questions about that, and then they can give you more and more details about that. But I felt that when I was talking with John, it was only a primary surface level verbalization of a symptom, but there wasn't the depth of symptoms like how one would suspect if somebody had a true delusion or a hallucination. Another thing that he had told me that I knew was not a true psychotic symptom is that he said that he was seeing images over his left eye only. Well, that is not consistent with schizophrenia or any psychotic illness. To just see images over one eye is not a typical symptom. So again, when I was speaking with him, I wasn't getting the feeling that the symptoms that he was describing to be psychotic symptoms were what I would consider true psychotic symptoms based upon what I know, and I've been treating patients for years. So that was another thing that sort of tipped me off a little bit, or something that I noticed. I also noticed when looking through the records, when you look through the jail records or even the hospital records, again, about the psychotic symptoms, there was no depth to the symptoms, and they were just one-word items, like seeing puppies. That isn't a psychotic symptom, or a typical psychotic symptom. It's not. Seeing dinosaurs, that is not a typical psychotic symptom, but it was one that he reported. So again, they were just sort of things that somebody that believes what somebody psychotic would say, maybe that's there, but I didn't get the impression that they were true psychotic symptoms because of that, and then also the depth of the symptoms were not there. So if somebody's experiencing a delusion, they might just say a delusion like, oh, I thought I was God. Okay, so then, but they can start going through that context of I thought I was God and talk about everything in his environment from the perspective of being God. Well, that was not happening with John. And so again, that was why I was like, this is not consistent with what I know to be true psychotic symptoms. And so another thing was the quickness on which they came. Now, usually psychotic symptoms, they percolate over a period of time. A little thing here and there, and then it might get a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I didn't feel like that happened here. There was all of a sudden, boom, a lot of symptoms, and then they were gone. Well, again, that's not consistent with a true psychotic disorder. So that was another thing that was making me think no. Those were the primary things. Also, just a responsiveness to medication was another thing that I was sort of looking at also.
And explain what you mean by that, responsiveness to medication.
Well, when somebody, let's say somebody is acutely psychotic to the degree of this murder, they are going to need a lot of medication in order to get that delusional construct down. Whenever John started being treated in the hospital, he was not getting any medications while he was in the jail because the symptoms were sporadic and he was not very compliant with medication. So that was part of the reason. But then when he got to the hospital, the medication that they had placed him on was very low doses of medication. And he got competent on those very low doses. Haldol 10 milligrams, Seroquel 20 milligrams, Vistaril 100 milligrams. His Wellbutrin was only 300 milligrams. And he was also on Neurontin. Now the Wellbutrin is a pretty decent dose, but all the other doses, Seroquel, the typical dose of Seroquel for somebody with acute psychotic symptoms is 400 milligrams twice per day. So the fact that he's only on 20 milligrams twice per day was giving me some pause because he got completely competent on that low dose of medication. Also, the Haldol 10 milligrams is a starting dose. So especially for John's size, he's a big guy. So again, that also is another factor there. And the fact that he was using substances, or he had used substances in the past, the metabolism could be faster. So again, usually when you see patients like that, they need more medication in order to get that effect. These were very low doses, and he was on that for an entire year and no longer had psychotic symptoms. So that was making me have another concern.
You mentioned delusions. What's a delusion? They've heard definitions of delusions. What is your definition of a psychotic delusion?
I feel bad because I'm at the end. But delusions is a fixed false belief. Fixed is the key word for delusion. It's the same thing. It's all the same all the time. It doesn't jump around. Now, it may have some development, like I said. So if somebody says that they're God, and then they might just have development of that delusion. It goes throughout the environment. You don't go from God to archangel to a devil to a demon to the Pope to this to that in a very short period of time like that, and even in a long period of time. Psychotic symptoms don't work like that. It doesn't change like that all the time. But people that think psychotic symptoms, what they look like, they can say that kind of stuff. So again, that was another thing to me, as far as delusional construct, it wasn't detailed, it wasn't in depth, and it continued to change. And it even changed when I had listened to Attorney Torres's her testimony here. It changed within the conversation. So you're God. Okay, if you're not, then I am. Whoa! I mean, that's a pretty quick change like that. So again, that is not consistent with what we know to be true psychotic delusions. So for all of those different reasons, I ruled out psychotic symptoms as any diagnosis. I ruled the diagnosis of a psychotic illness out because of all those different things.
Can you give an example to the jury of what would be a true psychotic delusion?
A true psychotic delusion, a minimum story, a patient that believes if they sold their soul to the devil that they could get this girl. They get this girl, their girlfriend or boyfriend, yada, yada, yada. 2 weeks later, he sees her kissing another person at a party. Now what? He then, my patient, cut his penis off.
Objection, relevance?
Over. Okay.
Cut his penis off as an offering to God because he had sold his soul to the devil for this girl, and now she's gone. Now he has to show God, I'm so sorry, please save my soul. I will do anything. And that was his offering because it was a sexual in nature delusion. So that is, and the delusion continued over time. I treated him for an extended period of time. But this is a case study that I had written up. But that is a psychotic delusion with a lot of depth. This was over a large period of time, and it was the same thing, but it got deeper and deeper and deeper. And then when it didn't work, you could see that how he still was in the delusion, but then, he continued to be within the delusion and did a serious thing in response to a delusion.
When someone is experiencing a true psychotic delusion, do they follow that delusion?
Yes, typically. Now, not always, because people that have schizophrenia, sometimes they sort of know it's a delusion by now. They know, particularly if they're medicated, they know, and they sort of fight with it in their mind. The delusions that people most follow are the delusion of God or some big being like that. But when I'd asked John, that was another thing, when I'd asked John about the voices that he heard at that time, he couldn't tell me who it was. And that's another thing that goes against schizophrenia, because they'll tell you who it was. They'll tell you the voice was God that told me to do this. But he could not tell me that. Could not tell me male or female, could not tell me that descriptor. So that was another thing for me that went against it.
In your differential diagnosis, did you rule out schizoaffective disorder?
Yes, well, schizoaffective disorder is sort of a combination of bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. So if you don't meet the criteria for schizophrenia, you're not going to meet the criteria for schizoaffective disorder. So that's why I ruled that out.
Did you rule out psychosis not otherwise specified?
Yes, because he didn't have the psychosis to even have the not otherwise specified.
In your opinion, does the defendant have a brain illness?
Well, I don't really know what the terminology of a brain illness is. Are we talking about just an organic brain syndrome?
Did you watch Dr. Mayer's testimony?
Yes.
He made reference to a brain illness. Does the defendant have an organic brain illness?
No. He doesn't have any positive CT, not positive MRI, no EEG findings, and no actual findings clinically. When you're looking at that, you want to look and see if you see something clinically. Is somebody, have a tobacco, alcohol, and spice were consistent. There were others that were also reported in hospital records, but those were consistent. And so I just went with that.
Okay. Do you believe that the defendant was malingering mental illness on the date of offense? And
No, I don't.
does he meet the first prong of the insanity definition?
No, he doesn't, in my opinion.
What is psychopathy?
Psychopathy is a clinical construct. It is in a category of personality disorders. Psychopathy is a clinical construct that defines or describes someone that has a very extreme way of doing many things.
Did you administer a PCLR checklist in this case?
Yes, I did.
All right. And did you use collateral data in order to administer that checklist?
Collateral data in addition to my interview with John.
Okay. Both were important in that analysis.
Yes.
So I'd like to go through some specific traits of psychopathy that you found on the PCLR.
Yes.
Did you find that the defendant in this case has a trait for glibness or superficial charm?
Yes, that's item number 1 on the checklist. A person that has,
Previously ruled on? Yes. Well, yes. Same rule.
a person that meets this item has an ability to tell convincing stories. They're very verbally facile, able to talk their way out of the box on some level. And that certainly was the case when I was speaking with John in my interview. There were many times that he'd come back to me with comebacks on things, different things, like when I would ask a question, he'd say, what does that mean? What's the relevance of that? That type of thing, he did that a lot. And when I would present collateral, and usually when he did that, he would look like the victim, and the other person would look like the person that had done something wrong.
Objection improper. On a roll.
Did you find that he met the criteria for the trait of grandiose sense of self-worth?
Yes, that's item number 2. And people that meet that item appear very self-assured and opinionated. And when they're talking, it's almost like they're performing. And I felt that way when I was speaking with John. I felt that way, that he was sort of controlling the interview. He told me how to run the interview. He was telling me that I was manipulating others to tell me what I wanted them to hear in terms of collateral information. And so that was one of the things I felt like him telling me how to run the interview. I just felt that was pretty extreme, because that usually doesn't happen. So I scored him a 2 on item number 2.
So as far as item number 3, person with a need for stimulation or proneness to boredom, did you find that he met that trait?
Yes, John is someone, at least in the history and the collateral information, he had a lot of different places to live. Per the attorney's record, 10 different places in 5 years. Also, school. He stopped school because he was bored, stopped jobs because he was bored. That gives one an impression that they would score highly on this stimulation or proneness to boredom. In addition, substance use is also another factor in there, because illicit substance use, they're looking for some stimulation external from their normal self.
Okay, some of these I'm just going to go through them, Doctor.
Yes.
You would agree that he met the trait for pathological lying, correct?
Yes.
Did he meet the trait for being cunning and manipulative?
Yes.
Is there a specific situation that you're aware of that was important to you for that?
Yes, there's multiple different situations, but one of them was a time when he had actually bought it.
Well, as previously noted. And here's the same rule.
Where he bought a specialized printer in order to make checks.
Objection may be approached.
Yes.
And Doctor, would you agree that for item number 5, one of the things that you found that was notable to you was when the defendant had a printer that he was using to print bad checks? Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to go into the next one. lack of remorse or guilt. Did you find that the defendant met that trait?
Yes, I did. Looking at the collateral information and doing collateral interviews, there were multiple different things that were done. When I asked John in my interview if he had any feelings of guilt about anything, he did say he had
Objection
feelings.
improper.
Could we approach another issue? The next item or trait is a shallow affect. Did he have that trait?
Yes. I noted that in a couple different areas. I noted that in my interview when we were talking about this murder, there was not very much expression there. I also noted that in the interrogation interview that he didn't have any real expression when having gone through a very significant thing. Regardless of what the origin of that was, there was no expression of any amount on his face.
You found that he has the trait for callousness or lack of empathy, correct?
Yes.
You also found that he has the trait for parasitic lifestyle. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And you found that he has the trait for poor behavioral controls. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
There's also a trait for promiscuous sexual behavior. Did you
Yes.
find that he met that trait?
Yes, I did.
Let me ask you about the next one after that.
Yes.
Did you find that he had met the trait for early behavioral problems?
Yes. One of the reasons that he presented for treatment was because he had very explosive anger, explosive, out of the range of normal for just a temper tantrum for a child. And so that was indicative of additional problems. And there was also, in his school records, there are some disciplinary reports in there as well.
Okay. There's also an item for lacking realistic or long-term goals.
Yes.
Did he meet that trait?
Yes, he did. There was a couple times, John had started stuff that could have been something like hair school or being a paralegal, but then he never followed through with it, or even college, never really followed through. So he had an idea, a broad, possibly grandiose idea, and then it just never materialized.
There's also a trait for impulsivity. Is that
Yes.
accurate?
Yes.
Did he meet that trait?
He did, because he'd break off relationships, quit jobs, change plans suddenly, and move from place to place with nothing more than a whim, and just not informing anybody, and would just be here or there, and nobody really knew where he was from time to time. So that meets that criteria for impulsivity.
There's also a criteria for irresponsibility, right?
Yes.
And did he meet that as well?
Yes, and one of the items I noted on that was just the letter from Social Security Disability that he had in his pocket when he was apprehended, that he did not have any rational or reasonable explanation for the funds that Phoebe was getting, where they went.
Okay. And there's also a trait for failure to accept responsibility for their own actions. You would agree that he met that trait as well, correct?
Yes, I do.
Did we approach, Your Honor?
Yes. Council approach, please. So that'll be it for today. We'll start tomorrow morning at 9. Thank you very much for your patience and cooperation. Dr. Mazzaro, for you go?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you for today, Dr. Mazzaro.
We're going to start again at 9 tomorrow.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
State?
No, this, no way, meeting, not gonna happen. Okay.
Yes, sir.